this video, we'll be discovering more about the rise and eventual decline of one of the world's greatest shipbuilding companies, Swan Hunters, which went from employing thousands of staff and turning out over 1,600 ships, including HMS Ark Royal, RMS Mauretania, and massive supertankers such as SO Northumbria, to shipbuilding no more on the now desolate site. With its origins dating back to the reign of Queen Victoria, Swan Hunters was the amalgamation of two former shipbuilding yards. The first was the Low Walker Yard, which was founded in 1853 by Charles Mitchell to build iron ships. Mitchell was from Aberdeen and met Anne Swan, the daughter of a farmer from Walker, and they married in 1854. In 1873, Mitchell took over the running of another shipyard, which had been managed by Coulson and Cook, but it had hit financial difficulties. Crucially, Mitchell appointed his wife Anne's brother, Charles Sheraton Swan Sr., as manager of this yard. The resulting new business was now known as C.S. Swan and Company, and the origins of the Swan Hunter shipyard in Wallsend were born. Swan Sr. made a success of this new yard, but in 1879, events took a tragic turn when Swan was killed in an accident in the English Channel. He was caught in the steamer Francis's paddle wheels when it was traveling at full speed, 2 miles from Admiralty Pier in Dover. The new manager of the Wallsend yard was George Burton Hunter, a shipbuilder from Sunderland who went into business with Swan's widow, and the new company was named C.S. Swan and Hunter in 1880, with Swan Sr.'s son, Charles Sheraton Swan Jr., becoming a director in 1895, aged 25, when the business was turned into a limited company with 2,000 employees. George Burton Hunter, the new manager of C.S. Swan and Hunter, was a tireless worker and took the company from strength to strength. He was also interested in the welfare of the people of Wallsend and purchased Wallsend Hall in 1914, after which he presented the hall and grounds to the Wallsend Corporation in 1919. Locals will know this site as the G.B. Hunter Memorial Hospital. It is now ran by the NHS. Hunter was knighted in 1918, along with Charles Sheraton Swan Jr., for his services to shipbuilding and head of Swans during World War I. He remained as Swan's chairman from 1895 until his death in 1928, aged 81. Ostensibly, Charles Sheraton Swan Jr. was at first reluctant to accept the knighthood, but did so on the proviso he was accepting this on behalf of the entire workforce of Swan Hunters and their immense contribution to the war effort. The second yard, which was key to the origins of Swan Hunters, was the Neptune Yard. Founded in 1860 by a Quaker, John Wigham Richardson, this operated just upriver from the Wallsend Yard. In 1903, the two yards merged and combined their resources to bid for the RMS Mauretania contract. Hunter and Wigham Richardson Limited also took over the dry docks yards between the Neptune and Wallsend yards and acquired a controlling interest in a yard close to Willington Quay, the Wallsend Slipway Engineering Company. The slipways at this company were dismantled, and the company concentrated almost solely on engineering. The early years of the 20th century were a boom time for Swan Hunters. She held the world record for output shipbuilding tonnage between 1906 and 1930. Notable ships which were made by Swan Hunter were the Carpathia, which infamously rescued over 700 survivors from the Titanic in 1912. She was driven by quadruple expansion engines built by the Wallsend Slipway and Engineering Company, which was directed under the able hand of Andrew Lang, a world-renowned builder of marine engines and boilers. The Carpathia was built for the Cunard Line and now sadly lies on the seabed, west of Fastnet Island, having been sunk by 2 German submarine torpedoes during World War I. Working conditions at Swan Hunters could be hard at times. Men worked in the outdoors in all weathers and without safety equipment and health and safety regulations of today. Up until the 1930s, there were no safety guards on the sides of ships, no handrails, and nor were safety helmets used. This culture was not specific to Swan Hunters and was indicative of the nature of shipbuilding at that time. Cold and wet conditions meant workers had to be constantly on their guard for slippages and accidents. Fatalities were not unheard of. It was not just the cold and wet that afflicted workplace conditions. The harm from asbestos was not fully appreciated, and falls from height were a constant hazard, especially when working on large supertankers. Nets had to be put up across the large cavernous interiors. One of the worst accidents occurred in 1976 when a fire swept through HMS Glasgow as it was being fitted out at the Neptune Yard, killing 8 men aged between 17 to 57 who perished from burns and asphyxia. Men at the inquest told of cigarettes that burned out quicker than they could be smoked, probably due to an oxygen-rich environment. At the time, there was no embargo on smoking in the workplace. Despite the hazardous working conditions, strong bonds and sense of community allowed workers to tackle the difficulties they encountered in their shipbuilding work. Training given by Swans was often in the form of a long apprenticeship, usually starting when you left school at 16. The training being given at Swans would often stand you in good stead for the rest of your career. Andrew Lang and his team also designed turbine engines for the Mauretania, based on ideas developed by Charles Parsons, whose company Jimmy Nail went on to apprentice with in the 1970s. The Mauretania was launched in September 1906 by the Dowager Duchess of Roxburgh, the event being watched by thousands on the riverbank of the Tyne. The Mauretania was over 31,000 gross tons and 790 feet long, which is over twice the length of St. James's Park in Newcastle. The Mauretania cemented Tyneside's reputation as shipbuilding exemplars. At the time, not only was she the largest ship in the world, the Mauretania was lightning on the water, holding the blue riband for the fastest crossing of the North Atlantic longer than any other liner, 20 years. In addition to this, she was magnificent, serving as a luxury hotel, hospital ship and troop ship during World War I, and latterly as a cruise ship under the Cunard Line. En route before her scrapping in July 1935, she sailed one more time up to the mouth of the Tyne, when she was boarded by the Lord Mayor of Newcastle and set off rockets in salute to her builders and home city. Crowds of sightseers lined the riverbanks from Whitley Bay to South Shields. In 1968, Swan Hunter and Tyne Shipbuilders was formed following a merger of 4 famous Tyne companies: Swan Hunter and Wigham Richardson, John Redhead and Sons South Shields Yard, Vickers Yard at Walker, and Hawthorne Leslie's Yard at Hebburn. At the time, it was the largest shipbuilding consortium in Europe. In 1977, following nationalization to become part of British Shipbuilders, Swans had 11,000 employees. Swan Hunters was later reprivatized in 1986 in a £5 million buyout by management. However, only 17 years on, Swans was down to only 125 employees. For the Mauretania job, Swans ordered a floating crane from Germany named Tyne, which arrived on the river in 1906. Unfortunately, this crane was sunk in the Tyne at Jarrow when it broke free of its moorings during a severe gale on Saturday, December 17, 1921, drifting 1.25 miles downriver, striking the steamer Benwood and drowning the crane watchman, who was found by divers in the wheelhouse of the crane some weeks later. This first Titan crane was eventually salved and then towed 7 miles out to sea and sunk at a depth of 32 fathoms, where it lies to this day. Her replacement Titan II was a steam-driven giant with a lifting capacity of 150 tons, but could carry a load of 300 tons on her specially strengthened dock. She was Dutch-built and was brought upriver onto the Tyne in March 1922 as the replacement. Swans formed a company with Wallsend Slipway and Hawthorne Leslie to operate the crane and hire it out for work up and down the river, even completing work as far upriver as the Tyne Bridge in 1992. Titan III was named in 1979, but was actually just the original Titan II crane on a new barge, which was based at the Wallsend shipyard till 2009, when she left the Tyne on the heavy lift ship Osprey on her way to India. Over the years, almost every type of vessel was launched from Swan Hunters. Naval vessels, including aircraft carriers, battleships, cruisers, destroyers, and frigates, to commercial vessels, including cable ships, train ferries, cruise liners, cargo liners, passenger ferries, icebreakers, oil tankers, and floating docks, which became one of Swan's specialities. Swans were known for constructing high-quality ships, a reputation earned through their pride in workmanship, determination to solve challenges, diligent effort, skilled craftsmanship, and willingness to embrace new innovations. Swans took orders not just domestically, but from across the globe, as far afield as Japan, Russia, China, Portugal, France, Canada, Italy, and Norway, to name a few. Some of Swan Hunters' ships were sadly sunk in World War II, including MV British Motorist. Launched in 1924 for the British Tanker Company, it was sunk in 1942 by Japanese bombs during a raid on Darwin, Australia. It was then raised by the Fujita Salvage Company in 1960 and towed to Japan for scrap. Another notable launch from Swan Hunter was the train ferry Changqiang, meaning Long River, launched in 1932 to serve the Yangtze River in China between Pukou and Nanking. This ship was built in the Neptune Yard and was capable of taking 3 trains on 3 lines of track. It was launched by Madame Kuo Tai-chi, wife of the Chinese ambassador to Britain. The Changqiang served the river well for many years, but was sunk during World War II to prevent her capture by the invading Japanese forces. The Australian cruiser HMS Sydney was launched in 1934 by the wife of the High Commissioner for Australia. Also in attendance was John Denham Christie, chairman of Swans and son of the innovative Neptune's ship designer, Charles Denham Christie. Sydney was gracefully elegant, and she made headlines with her exploits in the Mediterranean, particularly remarkable action off Cape Spada during World War II. Tragically, the Sydney was sunk in November 1941 with the dreadful loss of 645 men after a battle with a German ship, the Cormoran, off the western coast of Australia. Both currently lie on the seabed, the Cormoran being also sunk in the battle. It was one of the worst disasters to befall the Australian Navy in terms of loss of life. Although the Second World War was a boon for shipbuilding, prior to this, the Depression in the early 1930s affected all industries, including shipbuilding. When work was scarce, Charles Sheraton Swan Jr. kept men employed at the shipyards even when orders were scarce or inexistent, by making garden furniture in order that the workforce was not disbanded and they were available as a skilled team when the orders did eventually return. And return they did. During World War II, men were sometimes asked to work a day and a night shift consecutively, with only a short break between 5:15 p.m. to 7 p.m. At times, people living in nearby houses found it difficult to sleep due to the noise of riveters and caulkers from the yard, the noise reverberating in the metal surroundings. The workforce were tired, but knew it was nothing compared to the ordeal servicemen and women were experiencing at the time. However, shipbuilding on the Tyne during World War II was not without its dangers, the yards being a prime target for the German aircraft. In fact, a number of the workforce were drenched in 1939 when working on HMS Anson as an unexploded bomb went off that had been dropped into the Tyne the night before during a bombing raid. Completed at the Wallsend Yard in 1939, HMS Edinburgh took part in the hunt for the German battleship Bismarck. However, Edinburgh was sunk in 1942 after being hit by German U-boat torpedoes and sunk with many casualties, taking down its cargo of Russian gold bullion. The Dominion Monarch was the largest motor-driven passenger ship in the world when it was completed, with a quadruple-screw motor, built for the Shaw, Savile and Albion Line's London-New Zealand service. She operated as a civilian service between Britain and New Zealand, and she also served in World War II as a troop ship. In the 1960s, she was berthed in the post of Seattle as a floating hotel and entertainment center for the Seattle World Fair. Notably, she also features in the opening titles of Call the Midwife. The men and women working at Swan Hunters would be ruled by the familiar buzzers. Failure to make it to work on time for 7:30 would mean the docking of a quarter of an hour's pay. Men had been seen to be rolling under the shutter doors to avoid this penalty. At lunchtime, there would be a stream of workmen heading home for lunch or up to Wallsend High Street. Fridays was fish and chip day. Often the apprentices were dispatched to bring back the order. Payday would mean wives and women waiting at the top of the bank to receive their housekeeping money from the men before it was spent in the local pubs. Many of the workforce became attached to the vessels they had a hand in creating and would feel immense pride in seeing their finished work, which they had brought into being. Ships would be brought to life from the planning stage through to keel laying, construction on the berth, launch, fitting out, and then eventual sea trials before the handover to the customer. Workers would feel a sense of pride and excitement to see pictures of ships they had worked on, so far from home, carrying out vital and sometimes heroic roles. The Atlantic conveyor was completed at the Walker Naval Yard and requisitioned from Cunard by the Navy in the Falklands War in 1982. She was subsequently struck by Argentinian jet fighters and witnessed by Prince Andrew at the time, serving as a helicopter pilot in the Royal Navy. 12 men died and the ship was destroyed by a fire caused by the ignition of the below-deck fuel and ammunition following the strike. The loss of the ship and its helicopter cargo meant the British troops and Royal Marines had to yomp on foot to recapture Stanley from the Argentinians. The workforce felt the loss of this ship, and a second Atlantic conveyor was built in 1985 to replace the first at the Wallsend Yard this time. As well as shipbuilding, the bread-and-butter work of the yards was also repairs, maintenance, and overhaul of many ships, which also included conversions of boilers from coal to oil burning. In World War I alone, Swans repaired 556 ships during the conflict. 249 of these were warships, including HMS Lion, which greatly contributed to the war effort. This work was as vital as building the ships themselves and was relied upon for the ongoing success of the yard and the vital employment it brought to the area, including a shell-making workshop, which also employed local women during the Great War. During World War II, Swans again stepped up to the mark and made a vital contribution with the production of a battleship, minesweeper, 5 cruisers, 6 aircraft carriers, 8 frigates, 29 destroyers, and 25 landing craft, in addition to their usual repair work on the dry docks, such as repairing the damage to HMS Achates, which was mined off Iceland in July 1941. The Esso Northumbria was a 253,000-ton super tanker, nearly a quarter of a mile long. Designed to carry crude oil, its large design being a result of the Suez Crisis. It was launched in 1970. Watched by a crowd of 250,000, its sheer size meaning the river had to be closed to all other traffic at the time, and a section of the Hebburn Bank had to be cut away, the stern of the vessel coming within 20 feet of land. It had steam turbine-driven cargo handling equipment and onboard facilities included a hobbies room, swimming pool, and a small cinema. But she only served until 1982, when concerns about her stability arose. Upon its launch, despite being controlled by drag chains, it caused a huge surge on the bank of the Tyne opposite. 10 tugs escorted her on the 6-mile journey to the mouth of the Tyne, where she then was put out to open sea on her way to Lisbon. The image of the SO Northumbria and other similar supertankers towering over rows of terraces just inland from the Wallsend yards will forever be one of the iconic images of shipbuilding in the northeast. These terraced houses no longer exist and are now the site of the Segedunum Roman fort and museum, which they previously had been built over, part of Hadrian's Wall. The Vistafjord was launched in 1973. Constructed for the Norwegian America Line, she was a magnificent passenger liner which went on to sail for Cunard. She had a specially strengthened bow as a precaution against ice for cruising in Arctic waters. On her maiden passage up the Oslo Fjord, she was greeted with cascades of water from fireboats and smaller craft on her way to the Norwegian capital. HMS Ark Royal was a light aircraft carrier and the final vessel of the Invincible class, built by Swan Hunter and launched in 1981 by the then Queen Mother. Originally intended to be named Indomitable, she was renamed due to public sentiment after the scrapping of the previous Ark Royal. Slightly larger than her sister ships, Ark Royal featured a steeper ski jump ramp and was designed to carry Harrier jump jets and various helicopters. She had a crew of over 1,000 and was equipped with a deck park for aircraft after a 1999 refit, which also removed her Sea Dart missiles. Ark Royal underwent multiple refits, enhancing her capabilities, including operating Apache helicopters and hosting a V-22 Osprey. She was decommissioned in March 2011 as part of a defense review and was later sold for scrap to a Turkish company in 2013. The Tyne River's first recorded shipbuilding order was made in 1294 by King Edward I for the fledgling Royal Navy. The shipbuilder's yard was at the mouth of Loch Burn, which runs under Dean Street in Newcastle into the River Tyne. 700 years later, in 1994, HMS Richmond departed from Wallsend. She was the last ship completed by the old Swan Hunter Company. The shipyard band played for the last time amidst the rain on the banks of the Tyne. How Swan Hunters had come to this point was a matter of great consternation among the people of Tyneside, and especially those employed by the firm. The years following World War II had been prosperous for the firm, with many prestigious vessels being launched, alongside more mundane vessels such as cargo ships and oil tankers. However, by the 1980s, Swans was relying more on warship orders, and as relations with Argentina deteriorated in the spring of 1982, Swans pulled out all the stops to have the HMS Illustrious completion sped up, completing her 12 weeks ahead of schedule. Following privatization in 1986, Swan Hunters had been designated as a warship builder as part of the deal, which did not allow Swans to qualify for European Commission subsidies for shipbuilding. This put Swans at a serious financial disadvantage competitively. The James Clark Ross, launched in 1990, was an Antarctic research ship still operating to this day as a polar supply and research ship for Ukraine, but she was built at a loss for Swans and further weakened its financial position. The end of the Cold War had brought about a reduction in defense spending, and the hammer blow fell in 1993 when Swan Hunters failed to win the order for HMS Ocean, and mass redundancies followed. HMS Ocean was an order that could have saved Swans, but Swans' bid of £210 million for the contract was undercut at the time by a company with no experience of building warships of this type at £139 million. However, the National Audit Office found that the final figure paid was in fact £201 million. redundancies and shock at the loss of a once shipbuilding giant reverberated throughout the Northeast. The devastation on the local communities, including the men and women who were not only employed directly by Swans, but served in surrounding industries, cannot be underestimated. And to this day, the region laments the loss of an industry that once brought not only employment, but a sense of pride in Tyneside workmanship that was seen across the world. The last ship built at Wallsend, a small ferry, Pride of the Tyne, was lifted into the water by crane in June 1993, 133 years since the first ship ever built at the yards was launched. Also a small ferry, the paddle steamer Victoria.
Being best wasn't good enough.